Hey guys, I'm Nick and welcome back to Sci-Finatics. Well, today we're talking about episode 7 of Star Trek Picard season 3 entitled Dominion. This was a good episode. I had some surprises. Got a bit of exposition about what's going on. We finally got to find out a bit more backstory about Vatic, what her agenda is and how she got to be who she is and what her motivations are and everything. We got a returning legacy character to the show, which was really good. Some really good acting on Brent Spiner's behalf, doing the whole switcheroo between lore and data, which was cool. We had some predictions come true that I thought were going to be the case, and some predictions that maybe didn't quite come true. But still, we had some nice surprise appearances as well. So let's get into this week's review of episode 7, Picard season 3. So for starters, the episode begins with the Titan hiding in the Chintoka scrapyard. I thought this location might have been the location for a previous big battle sequence, and I was right. This was one of the locations where we had one of our big fleet battles as part of the Dominion War, so I was on the money for that. I thought this might have been one of those kind of locations. And right after that, we get a communique with Seven chatting to none other than her old security chief pal from the Voyager, none other than Tuvok. I did think our mystery guest this week was going to be Wayun, but it wasn't. It was Tuvok. So, but that's okay. It was really good to see Tuvok. Well, maybe not exactly Tuvok, but certainly Tim Russ appearing as Tuvok, or meant to be Tuvok, until they obviously discover that he's in fact a changeling pretending to be Tuvok. This was a really great scene. I loved the reminiscing or testing that Seven was doing to try to establish whether or not Tuvok was actually Tuvok or not, and there was a few questions that he got right, and she thought that he was the real deal, talking about Calto and the way they used to play that on Voyager and everything. So I thought, oh, this is great. And then he slips up, and Seven obviously realizes that it's not Tuvok after all, it's a changeling pretending to be Tuvok. However, we do know that the correct information that changeling Tuvok had meant that they actually had to interrogate him. So I wonder whether we're actually going to find the real Tuvok and rescue him at some point, whether he's being held somewhere similar to where Will Riker's being held. That'll be interesting to see, because Seven did establish that they would have needed to interrogate him in order to extract that Calto information or whatever from him. Great to see Tuvok in the captain's chair, wearing red, got the 4 pips going on. Obviously that's accurate, because obviously in order for the changelings to impersonate him, they would have had to accurately represent his position. And even though it did turn out to be a changeling, it was still good to see Tim Russ back, donning the pointy ears again to become Seven's old friend from Voyager. That was a really cool start to the episode. Now it seems like Raffi and Worf are off on La Serena. They're hunting down, or trying to hunt down what's happened to Will, so they're scouring the galaxy to try to locate him and to bring him home. I'm kind of a bit surprised this episode, considering where we ended last week's episode with Will on the Shrike and the reveal of Troy as well there, although it was never kind of clear as to whether this was actually Troy or a changeling pretending to be Troy in order to try to extract the information they require out of Riker. So I'm a little bit surprised we didn't get any Troy-Riker scenes in this episode, because I thought, considering that's where we ended last week's episode, that's kind of where we might pick up from the beginning of this episode, but that wasn't the case. We didn't really see any. We saw a changeling pretending to be Riker at the end of this communication with Tuvok, but we didn't get to see any more Troy in this episode, which I thought we would. We've got Alandra having analysed the data law android and trying to work that out. We got a bit more exposition here about the different partitions with the law side and the data side, and there's a bit of B4 in there, and there's a bit of Sung in there, but the B4 and Sung is information rather than personality. So that's interesting. And look, really, really good in this episode. Brent Spiner never ceases to amaze me with some of his acting chops, the way he's able to switch between data and law in this episode. There were some really cool moments here where obviously he's just chopping back and forth between the two personality types. Really well done. Next we get the scene with the face talking to Vatic, and we basically find out that from the dialogue, and this was part of the sneak peek scene from last week, that the way the face talks to Vatic is implying that the face is not another changeling. It talks about being your kind and everything, not as if it's our kind. So it would seem that whoever is Vatic's boss isn't a changeling, but is able to utilize the changeling physiology in terms of cutting her hand off to be able to communicate with her. So I thought we might have got a bit of a reveal this episode as to the identity of the face, but we didn't. So I guess we're holding that over till maybe next week's episode. We got a nice scene with Sydney and Jack in the turbo lift. Jack's obviously a bit interested in Sydney. There's a bit of growing chemistry there. Although she's a bit skeptical of him and he's sort of a bit awkward. And then obviously he's got this weird mind control thing going on. So this is another bit of a reveal we had in this episode, which goes into a bit more detail about Jack's abilities. And I think the whole Irremotic syndrome thing, I think, was a bit of a red herring just to kind of, misdirect us. Him being able to read minds, and not only read minds, but also have a sort of telekinetic influence over people as well, it would seem. Jack's getting a bit self-conscious that all of this trouble is kind of all because of him, so he wants to set a trap for Vatic. So they fashion this trap where they lure the Shrike to a location where they pretend to have been in a battle with a Vulcan ship, and they use that opportunity to get the crew from the Shrike to board the Titan, and then proceed to trap most of the Vatic and her crew behind force fields. But they didn't necessarily factor in the fact that the law was going to mess up their plans a little bit. There's a few more little clues here in terms of interesting dialogue between Vatic and Jack. Vatic saying, "I'm going to take you to a better place." What is this better place? Is she talking about the Great Link or something else? There's all these little moments with Jack this episode, which, obviously is hinting towards who he actually is. Not to mention a potential misdiagnosis of Irremotic syndrome, according to Data. But it seems that there's much more to his genetics than perhaps we originally thought. And there's some really nice scenes here with, Beverly and Jean-Luc talking to Vatic. However, I gotta say, I really hate some of the lighting choices in this episode. These point source lights shining directly into camera make absolutely no sense whatsoever. I don't care that they look dramatic. There are ways that you can have lighting being dramatic without having ridiculous lights directly in the middle of your shot. I'm a trained cameraman and cinematographer myself, and knowing what the corridors and rooms on board starships are meant to look like, these just look ridiculous to me. And the cinematography in this season is the one and only thing I haven't enjoyed. The scenes are either way too dark or there are ridiculous obtrusive lights right in the middle of shot. Obviously we have Law doing the double cross on our crew. We've obviously got the Data and the Law personalities in conflict, and some really nice stuff with Geordie trying to appeal to Data as well. I thought was really quite touching in this episode. There's some interesting dialogue here between Vatic and Beverly, saying that Jack wasn't for Beverly. It's seeming more and more like Jack was some sort of medical experiment or something gone wrong. Maybe genetically he's the son of Beverly and Jean-Luc, but there's something more to his genetics and physiology that has been fiddled with, that we're not quite seeing the whole story of yet. And next we get to find out a little bit more about the origins of Vatic and everything, and the sense that this enhancement that they've been talking about in the last couple of episodes, in terms of the changelings being able to hold a kind of a human form for longer, was partially a result of the virus that was inflicted upon the changelings at the end of the Dominion War. So whatever was engineered there in terms of the virus and then subsequently the cure, it's modified changeling physiology to be able to more accurately represent humans down to the cellular level with a greater level of accuracy and detail, it would seem. And then we get to find out about Project Proteus, which is obviously some sort of dodgy Section 31 style off the books project back at the end of the Dominion War, obviously when they were trying to cook up the virus to infect the Great Link and everything. Part of the research that potentially created that solution also seemed to have tortured and created a lot of quite nasty experiments towards the changelings in order to do that. So it appears that obviously in the Daystrom station during the Dominion War, this scientist who obviously looked exactly like Vatic was responsible for conducting all these kind of quite inhumane experiments against the changelings in order to perhaps help facilitate this virus that was concocted. I love the debates that were going on between Jean-Luc and Beverly, and they're talking about essentially executing Vatic. It's like, whew, this is, they're obviously skirting the line of what's acceptable behavior and everything. This is a very different Beverly and Jean-Luc than, we would have seen back in Next Generation times, where they would have probably had a big speech about the morality of, killing prisoners and all this sort of stuff, and what lengths are you willing to go to, thwart your enemy and all that sort of thing. So there's some interesting dynamics there. And obviously Lord does what he does best, which is cause chaos and mayhem by disabling the force fields holding all of Vatic and her henchmen, lets them loose aboard the ship. They're then able to take over the ship from the rest of the crew, even though we get a few moments like Sydney being smashed headfirst into a force field, and Jack having to what appears to be take control of her body in a sort of a puppetry kind of fashion, where Jack's doing all these kind of fight moves, and basically Sydney is executing them at exactly the same time, as if Jack has some sort of telekinetic control over her body, which obviously is an ability we haven't seen before, but obviously is all wrapped up in whatever is going on with him, perhaps telepathically as well, in terms of the whole mind reading aspect that was going on in this episode as well. I don't think it's any coincidence that Troy hasn't joined the rest of the crew on the Titan, because I think the second that Troy telepathically reads Jack, she's going to uncover a lot more to do about what's going on with him. With all the changelings loose on the ship, they seem to be able to take control of the ship fairly fast. Shaw cops a bit of a beating, and it appears that Vatic and her henchmen take control of the Titan. And the episode ends with Vatic posing a very interesting question, and that is, who is Jack truly? Because it doesn't seem that Jack is necessarily Jack, or Jack's origins aren't necessarily what we think. There's a lot more to Jack than just being the son of Beverly and Jean-Luc. There's something weird going on with him genetically, having not only sort of mind reading or telepathic kind of effects, but also telekinesis. We've obviously got him having the visions of the roots growing all over the ship, and him with the glowing red eyes and everything. And they're not symptoms of Irumodic syndrome. So there's definitely more to Jack than what has previously been revealed. All in all, I didn't mind this episode. I thought it was quite good. Great to see Tuvok at the start. I thought we'd be seeing Weyoun, but we didn't. So I guess I was a little bit. It was good to see Tuvok. I'm not going to say I'm disappointed, because it wasn't a disappointing episode. But I guess, considering the episode was entitled Dominion, I thought it was going to be a lot bigger than it perhaps turned out to be. I kind of thought, Dominion, okay. The character I thought we might be getting was Weyoun, which might have necessitated him sort of maybe rocking up on some other ships to rendezvous with the Shrike. I thought it might have been a bigger episode, but the actual story, when you think about it, was quite a small story. It was just this story about them just on board the ship, posing that trap for Vatic and her crew, being locked behind a couple of force fields. It was actually quite a small, almost what you'd consider like a ship in the bottle kind of style episode almost. Maybe a big bit of battle sequence between some other Dominion ships or something. It set itself up to be maybe a bit of a bigger scale episode than it actually turned out to be. I guess I probably set myself up with probably higher expectations based on the title and everything, but it actually turned out to be a story told on a much smaller scale. But still, we had some really good scenes with with Data and Law and Geordie and everything, and obviously the appearance by Tuvok and whatnot at the start, or Changeling Tuvok. So that was all kind of cool as well. But guys, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode. Leave a thought in the comment section and let me know. Check out my merch store, 20% off at the moment until Sunday. I got a new variation of this shirt in the merch store. It replaces Pike's Enterprise, the Discovery, and the Protostar with the Defiant, the Titan, and the Enterprise E. So be sure to check that out in the merch store. It's something to be quite popular this week. Also, guys, don't forget to subscribe to Sci-Finatics if you haven't already done so. Don't be shy. Click on that big subscribe button to stay current and up to date with all the latest Star Trek news on YouTube. I'll be back very soon with my next video. I'll catch you guys then.